and just start talking. Let's get us moving so that at noon we're in the chairs, and I want to be respectful of your time as well. So just a couple housekeeping things. If you don't know where the bathrooms are, they are by the elevator. So the way you came, if you came up through the museum, they're directly to the right in the elevator lobby on this floor. And this is informal, and so by all means, if you need to grab and refresh your drinks or whatever it is. I see everyone has found the food, and that's good. Enjoy your food throughout the program. If you parked in our parking garage, let's make sure that you get a voucher that'll get you out for free. Our parking garage can't hold all of us because we've got a packed house today, but if you were lucky enough to get a spot, just make sure you get a voucher before you leave today. At your tables, you'll see cards and pins. I know many of you will probably take notes on them, but they have a functional purpose for us as well. If you have a question that you would like to ask, there will be a Q&A period at the end. We'll have staff members walk around and pick the cards up so that we can get through as many questions as possible. And I'm looking forward to that segment. And we found that that's just a way that we can get through more questions. And so we're looking forward to that. We have, as you can see, a lot of people here, but we also have people joining us through a live stream, Channel 9. Our partner is live streaming this event, and so you'll hear reference to that a couple times throughout. It's not going to affect the presentation for you, except for there are people on the other side of screens watching this as well. So I just wanted to make sure you are aware of that. As with everything we do here, we want to always reflect on why we do it. And on the outside of the gates of time is the preamble to our mission statement, and we try to start every program with that. And so, if you would, please join me in a moment of silence as we come here to remember those who were killed, those who survived, and those changed forever. Thank you. To kick us off, I would like to invite Carrie Watkins to the stage. Carrie, President and CEO of the Memorial Museum, the guardian of this story, and one of the reasons why this institution continues to be so meaningful. Carrie.
Thank you guys so much. Some great familiar faces and so many new faces today. Thank you for joining us. This is number 10, Better Conversations during this 30th anniversary year. We'll have 2 more, and Stephen will go over those at the end. But thank you guys for being here. We don't take these conversations for granted. We hope those live stream is hitting Washington, D.C. and Capitol Hill, and they can understand that people can sit down around a table and have tough discussions. We have to continue to set that example. And I'm not political, but we have to continue to set that example. And we have the Bush Library here today. We'll have the Clinton Library here in December. It is about bringing everyone to the table, and we have to continue to have the hard conversations, whether we agree or disagree. It's about bringing people to the table and finding something that you feel strongly about, something I feel strongly about, and figuring out how to meet in the middle. That has to continue to be done if we're going to enjoy this country, which we have loved for so long. So I hope that you guys will. Today, that moment of silence is like deafening when you realize what we lost, and we can never have back, but we can continue to gain from that loss and learn from that loss, and so that they have not died in vain, and those who survived and those first responders, all those people who are still dealing with the trauma, even 30 years later, that they work to make sure. We work to make sure as a community we're one community. And even when we don't agree, we figure out how to meet in the middle. And so that really is where we are. So when I saw this article that Margot had written, it like sang to my heart. I was like, oh my gosh, this is where we are as a country. we want to be patriotic. We need to be more patriotic. But then there's this whole nationalism movement we have to figure out. And we've lived through other movements. We've figured it out. And sometimes we've gotten a little worse. Sometimes we've gotten a little better. But what are we as individuals? Where do we stand? And we're all different. And that's okay. That's really what we want. This is the country we love. And so I hope today, as Margot and Stephen have this discussion, you guys will just take a breath and think about, what can I learn? What can I share? What can I continue to absolutely believe in? And where can I give a little bit? Or what can I give a little bit on? I had dinner last night with one of my great mentors, and we're talking about what's happening in D.C., and she's like, do you really think it's all Chuck Schumer's fault? And I was like, no, it's never one person's fault. And she's like, this is worth the whole dinner. And it's like, sometimes we just hear the noise of the day or the media or whatever we're listening to, and we begin to believe it. And that's why these conversations, these better conversations, are so critical. Just every day, Oklahomans, Americans sitting down, breaking bread, figuring out what and who we are. And can we give a little? Can we take a little? And can we be a little better when we walk out the door today? We really, I bring up the government shutdown because we're impacted. We're not owned and operated by the government, but we have an important affiliation. And Park Service normally delivers the talks outside every day. Like yesterday, there were 10 or 12. I got to do a couple, 8th graders, which is absolutely my favorite age. But some people got the RV group, some people got the senior group. I got the 8th graders, which I loved. But we miss the Park Service being out there. I wrote about this on social media. We miss them. If there's ever a place the government and the people should work together, it should be on this ground where an American soldier thought he could take down his government. And he didn't, because of people like you. And so we want everyone to work together. And we want our park rangers back outside. They're here today just on their own time, having lunch and learning, because that's the partnership we have. But I really do want you guys, just to encourage you to just be present in the moment and listen to these words, by just have some conversation and hear what the challenge that we have in front of us today. So if Margot Habiby is here with the Bush Library, if you want to come on up. Margot's from Oklahoma, or went to the University of Oklahoma, and I think that's about as good as you can get. But she is now Deputy Director of Communications at the Bush Library and the Bush Presidential Center, which has done remarkable work and continues to do remarkable work. And we're glad to have Margot here, back home for just a few hours, and Stephen will lead this discussion. But I will just remind you guys that President Bush was here nearly 25 years ago to dedicate this museum. He had been in office a mere, I think, 20-some days, and he came here. It wasn't quite 30 days. He came here with a big group of his cabinet to dedicate this site, and we walked him through the museum. We had 45 minutes or an hour to do that in, and to hear he and Mrs. Bush understand this story. They were here that first Sunday after the bombing at the prayer service, and so there's a connection to this story. They've been great to us. And they have been a part of this story. And as he told the audience that morning, every American should see this place to understand what we lost and how hard we're going to have to work to get it back. And so today we just continue that conversation, Margot and Stephen. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Margot, I'm really delighted to have you here as part of our Better Conversation series. And for those of you who are this is your first time into the room, Better Conversations is this that you see in front of you, but it's also a program, and we go into schools and we go speak to businesses and do professional development with the intent of practicing conversation skills that allow us to speak across divides. And certainly, we find ourselves divided in this current moment. We want to thank our sponsors, the Kirkpatrick Foundation, who are own this event through the end of the year, and we're very thankful for their partnership. They believe in that, the task of building, communities that are able to speak to one another, and we appreciate that. The foundation of Better Conversations is grounding virtues, practicing the skills of patience, hospitality, humility, all important to this task that we have in front of us. Okay. And so now that's out of the way, and I don't mean to skip through it in a way that it is very important, and I want to encourage you to look into it and maybe bring it to your civic groups that you're a part of, because we'd love to join you there. But here, right, we get to dive into a topic, and as Carrie mentioned, you wrote a piece encouraging and advocating for this version of nationalism. And since then, I don't know if they're copying you or not, but I've seen, and I'm not kidding, 4 different national level articles in the Atlantic, in the Washington Post. I saw a podcast on it, and so they're picking up on this topic, and we'll get into the distinction between patriotism and nationalism, but I'm wondering, where did you come up with this idea? Is there a story there?
There is, actually. One of my colleagues at the Bush Center is a man by the name of Joseph Kim, and Joseph has a fascinating personal story. Google it if you get a chance. He grew up in North Korea and is now a proud American, but as a teenager, he escaped authoritarianism in North Korea and starvation and all sorts of tribulations that I won't get into. But we were having a conversation with some other people at the Bush Center, and he confided in us that he was struggling to tell the difference between patriotism and nationalism. And he asked us if we could please help him understand the difference. And we all sort of stuttered through some explanations. And then I went home, and that weekend I thought more about it. And then I came in the following week and wrote my piece, because it is one thing to not be able to tell the difference if you grew up in North Korea. But I would hope that in America we all can do a little bit better. And that perhaps it's a topic we all need to think a little bit more about. So.
What was Mr. Kim's reaction to all this? Was there
to
the conversation, the piece,
I mean, I think the thing for him, especially, and I don't know if some of you have traveled to countries with dictators or authoritarian leaders, there tends to be very much of a, I've lived in the Middle East, and wherever you go, there are pictures of your leaders up on the wall. And which is not to say that in my school in Stillwater, we didn't have pictures of all the presidents up. We did. But it tends to be much more of a situation in which you talk about the personalities a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So
cult of personality. Yeah. I think it's interesting because in North Korea or Korea in general, you're Korean because that's where you're born, it's where your ancestors were. But here in the United States, you can get into who was here first sort of argument. But whether you can trace your lineage all the way back to Thomas Jefferson or not, the person who came here and worked for citizenship and was naturalized last week is just as much of an American, and that's a unique thing, right? And so I think that kind of will come out there, right? And so whether from North Korea or you've been here, it's interesting. So what is the distinction, right? In the article you wrote, to tackle the problems facing our country today, we need more patriots and fewer nationalists. And when I brought this up to some of my friends, they were confused. They're like, well, isn't that the same thing? So how do you define the distinction?
So I think when you look outwardly, patriotism and nationalism can look very similar. both, go Team USA and cheering on your country. And I would hope that everyone in this room loves our country. However, do we want our country to succeed because we love it, or do we want to dominate? And I think that is the distinction for me, is is there a sense of superiority and a desire to dominate, which can lead to xenophobia and other issues. It can lead to attacking our fellow Americans. It can lead to denigrating people we see as different from ourselves, both at home and around the world. It's taking that love of country and turning it into something that maybe isn't necessarily positive, but has some negative repercussions.
Interesting. So, who gets to claim to be a patriot then? Like, what is the? I feel like the crux of it is who gets included, and so I don't know. What do you?
I think that's the challenge. I mean, I think a lot of nationalists see themselves as true patriots. And I don't know that, it's something that externally we get to decide. It's just, I think we all need to closely examine our what is motivating us. Look, I grew up in Stillwater and I went to OU. It is October. I live in Dallas. I am no stranger to smack talk. Trust me. It is, it is football season. We had a very sad performance on Saturday, but what can we say? At the end of the day, we have to understand where that line is between a game and talking out of pride in teams and the groups that we belong to, and being able to come together and can put that behind us. As a child, if any of you played childhood sports, one of the key lessons is at the end of the day, you got to shake the other team's hand and congratulate them on a good game. We teach our children that those lessons in good sportsmanship, but in the political sphere, we seem to have somehow gotten away from that or forgotten that. So at the end of the day, we're all hopefully striving for the good of a country that we love, and need to find those ways to build that community back.
Interesting. In doing some research for this, I was curious because I didn't know where patriot, the word, came from, and surprised it's as a Greek root. But in the 18th century, it was being used in England to mean supporter of the monarchy. And so if you were a patriot, you supported the king and the monarchy. And I think that's really interesting because it's you grow up in school learning about the American Revolution, and that is the word that the American revolutionists chose to use. And so divorcing it from supporting your government and it became supporting an idea. I think that there is some danger there, because if I'm defining patriot based on my ideas, if you don't agree with me, you don't get to be a patriot. And I think that is, when we talk about patriotism or nationalism, like there is some tension there. Thomas Jefferson famously wrote in a letter a quote that means something a little bit different here. He said, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." That is a quote that was on the shirt of one of the perpetrators who caused the devastation here 30 years ago. And so that is somebody like you referenced, someone who believed himself to be a patriot, and was using a quote by one of the founding fathers, kind of a definitive line in how we think of ourselves as American patriots. So how do you come to terms with the patriotism you're advocating for, and then this other brand?
I would say that if your patriotism, or whatever term you choose to call it, is predicated on the backs of somebody else, on putting some other group of people down, that you might want to take a closer look at where you're coming from. Because, going back to the founding fathers and, all men are created equal. If you think some people are less equal than others in your version of America, then perhaps you need to take another look at what you're espousing.
And so, it's I think that's a good, and an example of kind of that is, so you have on one hand this person wearing the T-shirt who lights a fuse in a truck bomb, and on the other hand you have people rushing to the scene minutes later, who showed up to do what they could, and support really poured in from all over the country and from outside of the country. And so showing up and unifying to support those in need is just a different brand or different version of what it means to be a patriot. You were, do you mind? I'm assuming you're old enough to remember 1995.
I am.
Do you have, a story or memory or?
So I graduated from OU in '94, and in '95 I was in graduate school in New York. So I was not in Oklahoma at the time, but I got a call from a former classmate of mine from OU who said, "Are you watching TV?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? It's 10 o'clock in the morning. Why would I be watching TV? I'm studying." He said, "Turn on the TV." And I turned on the TV, and there was Linda Kavanaugh talking at me. So there was a live feed into the New York station that I was watching from Oklahoma. And of course, it was just as horrified and devastated as, obviously not as much as when you were actually physically here, but just, I was born and raised in Oklahoma and spent my whole life here up until that point, and just, just crushing. I'm also Arab American, and some of you may remember in the early days after the bombing, there were reports that the perpetrators were from the Middle East, which ended up not being true, but it was a scary time. I remember one particular commentator who went on national news saying that, talking about this hotbed of terrorist activity among the Arab student population at OU. I'm like, I just graduated. I would have seen it. It wasn't there. But it was just kind of this fear-mongering that was going on, and then came to find out, unfortunately, that it was homegrown terrorist. But it was terrifying at the time to see this horrible event that just rocked me to my core, and then to have the community blamed for it also in the initial days. So
it must have been terrifying.
So, yeah. I mean, I was a little removed, but I was worried about people at home. So.
Right. Yeah. And I think for those of us who are old enough to remember, 3 days later they announced the suspects, and it's people who had served in the military. It was shocking, right? And I think it gets, but I'm curious because had it been somebody who hadn't served, or had it been somebody who had immigrated, I'm wondering how that would have played out differently. I think there are layers here. in how we define ourselves, nationalism versus patriotism. What are in the article you go into, how you see nationalism and how it plays out with some of these groups who maybe call themselves patriots, but it sounds like you're putting them in this camp of nationalism. And so how do we define that?
Again, I think some of the defining characteristics are a bit of a superiority complex, the need to denigrate others to elevate oneself, and that can be true both domestic and globally.
So sort of like a superiority or supremacy.
Yeah. And the slippery slope for that is it leads to xenophobia. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it leads to racism or misogyny or other issues. If you want to define your brand of nationalism, patriotism, whatever we want to call it, as the definition, then other people's definitions become less valid and can be, and there's less hesitation in dismissing different ideals. Years ago, again, I'm old enough to remember this, we would define a problem as a nation, say poverty, say drugs, say whatever. And in general, we would agree on the problem. And then one side said, I think we should solve it like this. And one side would say, I think we should solve it like that. And we would disagree on the solutions. Sometimes we'd end up compromising, sometimes we wouldn't. But at the end of the day, we weren't fighting over the core problem. Where I see us dividing nowadays is we can't define the problems or reach an agreement on what factual situations are, so then we can each strive to reach answers on our own.
That's interesting. I like framing that way. I'm going to pull something else I read, and honestly I guess I could think back to like high school. I remember reading Tocqueville, who in the 1830s traveled around America and wrote about essentially what he saw, and he included this passage about patriotism, and he defined it as sort of different than what he saw in Europe, where it was tied to ethnic nationality, but rather he called it a civic pursuit. And I'm going to quote real quick. Patriotism of reflection, nurtured by the laws, it grows by the exercise of civil rights, and in the end, it is confounded with the personal interests of the citizen. And so I'm curious, like how, and I guess you've answered a little bit, but how would you today define that civic pursuit? Like, what is the health of that civic pursuit? Defining ourselves by laws and these ideas.
I don't think that I can specifically speak to the health of it. I can speak to how I think we should approach it, which is thinking, the President Bush has said we should be citizens, not spectators. John F. Kennedy talked about ask what not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So I think if we want to embrace that level of civic growth and improvement, that the way we do that is by asking how we can serve and how we can contribute, much as you mentioned after the bombing when people came out of the woodwork to ask how they can help and how they can contribute. Let's not wait for times of crisis for our best selves to come forward and figure out how we can make a difference in our nation and in our world. But let's do it as a matter of course. At the Bush Center, we are very engaged with veterans and military families, and one of the things that our experts in those areas have been writing a lot about is how when veterans return to civilian life, just because they've taken off the uniform, their opportunity to serve has not ended, and they have all the tools to be great community leaders. And how can we better facilitate that? And how can we encourage veterans and military families who've already given so much to this country, make no mistake, but have felt the draw to service, to continue that service in ways that lead our communities and help us grow and move forward. So,
I love that, right? The service aspect. How do we convince, everybody, but young people especially, looking at the polls, defining yourself as a patriot is like through the floor, right? In terms of people who consider themselves to be patriotic, and there's an age divide as well. The younger generation very much sees it as tied to what you're describing as sort of a us versus them nationalism, and not as what many of us grew up thinking about, and that's supporting our country and working to make it a better place. So how do we turn this around?
I mean, make no mistake, the world has changed in a lot of ways, some good and some bad. When I was growing up in Stillwater, there were a lot of community organizations. You had the Kiwanis, you had the Elks. My mother was engaged in all sorts of community endeavors. We see less and less of that, and we talk about the epidemic of loneliness in this country, and a lot of the conversation about it has been about how it affects individuals and their mental health. But I think we need to have a larger conversation about how does it affect our communities and larger mental health, because we're not connecting in all the ways. If you were in a bowling league with somebody decades ago, you probably weren't going to ask them their politics in great detail. You were going to talk about your game. You were going to, if you had a civic project through your organization, you were focused on that. And I think events like this one about community building are very important. But I'm not going to expect kids to put down their phones, but I think we do need to, or adults for that matter. Have you seen those pictures of like husband and wife on the couch, each of them looking at their phone, not talking to each other? Or maybe you've experienced it, I don't know. But I think we need to find ways to rebuild communities, and people have less time, and we have more two-income households. The way my mother was able to engage with civic organizations because she didn't work outside the home. I mean, that's kind of a bygone era in a lot of ways. But and church attendance is way down. People used to build community through their faith houses of faith. Especially since COVID, a lot of people started watching church in their pajamas from their living room and never went back. But I think we all need to actively look for ways to build community and build connection. I mean, don't make it about, it doesn't have to be about politics. It has to be about getting to know your neighbors and your friends, and maybe, your common interests that have nothing to do with the way you voted. I would love to just hang out with a group of people and have no idea which way they voted. I can't think of the last time I did that. Because people just put that forward so early in conversation and do the virtue signaling for their community to say, okay, well, here's how I think, and this is where I fall. And
the significance of bowling leagues, right, or things like that, right?
Whatever we want to call them. Pick your own.
Book clubs,
Yes.
knitting clubs, things like that. I agree. I can't remember the last time I heard anyone talking about their bowling league. For sure.
I just think of the Flintstones and the bowling league, from the can wear the funky hats and.
Oh yeah. What about the? So you mentioned being consumed with our phones. Is there community online? Like, how do you see that playing out? Because I don't know. I think that there are arguments to say that the internet can be a place of connection. I don't know. What do you think?
A classmate of mine at OU has become an expert in audience engagement, and one of the things she posts before every election is, I think the New York Times or the Washington Post, I forget what, has a piece they post about, here's what you're seeing on your social media feed if the algorithm thinks you're a Republican, and here's what you're seeing if you're a Democrat. And it just really illustrates how really caught in our bubbles we are, even if we don't think we are, because the algorithms and the tools keep us there. And I don't pretend to be an expert on how those work, but it is definitely sobering to look at. And I would encourage, people to look outside their bubbles as often as they can.
Yeah, no, and I think, for me, recent events really made that apparent, because having conversations with friends, and I know that we have a lot of similarities, but clearly our internet habits are different, because it was like we were speaking about two very different things, right? And so you enter into a current event conversation, and we have just different information. Different perceptions. We've seen different videos and different audio and different quotes, and so it is no wonder that there is disagreement and also confusion there if we're not even working from the same reality.
Again, it goes back to defining. We agree on the facts and then approach them differently. And that is where I wish we could find some common ground again, is defining problems. Because, look, everyone's entitled to their opinion, and I would love to hear multiple ideas about ways to solve problems. But when we can't agree on the problems, that's not a good starting point. So.
Yeah, for sure. As a reminder, we're going to move to questions here in a little bit. And so if you have a question or something you would like to bring up, jot it down on your card. And also we should say ahead of time that both of our institutions are nonpartisan, and therefore I can't really speak directly on the Republican versus Democrat we're not going to endorse a candidate here or anything like that. But talking about where we are as a society, certainly that's what this is all about. And so when you have a question, you just raise your card, and we'll have staff come through and pick it up. And so that'll happen here shortly. So I'm curious, can we kind of get ahead of this in the schools? Like, what role does education have here? I know that you hear a lot that the purpose of school today is, you hear career readiness and all this stuff, but public education in its early days, one of its primary functions was to create like an American culture that we all could understand, whether we have been here for generations or we were a new immigrant. And so what is the role of education in this topic?
I'm glad you asked me that, because education is one of the big policy areas that the Bush Center focuses on, and I'm very lucky to work with some of our education policy experts. And the way they would answer that question is it starts with literacy. And the literacy numbers are not good. We cite data from the nation's report card, which has come out. I believe the latest results also showed that civics education was near an all-time low. I actually wrote a piece a year or two ago about where I highlighted my friend's son, who spent the whole summer planning to run for student council with his friends, and then his elementary school canceled the election, and because it was going to be a waste of time, or they were too worried about kids becoming partisan. And I argued in my piece that this is one of the ways we model democracy. I mean, yes, we know that kids use it as a popularity contest and all these things, but there was one child who, when they finally agreed to bring back the election, but they weren't allowed to, they could each make a poster and have a very limited campaigning. If they actually asked someone to vote for them, they were disqualified. One kid who, because nobody had ever taught him any differently, tried to buy votes. And they disqualified him, and then finally used it as a teaching moment to say, okay, you can't do that, and here's why. And so my piece was arguing that, okay, elementary school student council elections might be a little silly to us. However, teaching kids how elections work from the youngest age is valuable, and maybe we should allow class time for that. The other thing I remember is every 4 years in school, we got pulled out of class to watch the inauguration. And the same child, they didn't watch the inauguration in his school, and I told his mother, I said, oh, I would be a little concerned about that. Did you ask him why? And they said, oh, Mommy, that would be inappropriate. It's about Democrats and Republicans. I said, no, actually the inauguration is about putting that aside and coming together as a country. And if we're teaching kids that that's partisan and not how to come together like the good sportsmanship and shaking hands after the game, what message does that send? So I think there are ways to teach, to model democracy and democratic behavior, and to teach civics and do things like that that will help children grow into democratic culture, the way many of us were lucky to do when we were children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. At the top of the program, Carrie was talking about the shutdown and how it's impacting us and, institutions around us. I wonder if we, collectively, if we aren't able to practice civil discussion and debate ourselves, like how would we expect, right, those that are the most partisan among us to do that in Washington? And so it's easy to point the finger at your representatives who aren't getting it done, but it's maybe we need to be a little more reflective in our own practices and what we expect of ourselves.
Well, and don't forget that children are sponges, and if they hear it at home, they might repeat it in school, and I think we all need to be very careful in the behavior that we model.
Yeah.
We at the Bush Center, we also have a museum. I just had the joy or the honor of walking through the one here, but right now we have a special exhibit at the Bush Center called Game Changer: How Sports Unite Us. And as part of it, we had the legendary Joe Buck speaking a week or two ago, and he was talking about, to extend the sports analogy from earlier, how when you're cheering on your team in the stands with, and high-fiving the person next to you, you didn't ask them how they voted. You don't care. You just care that, oh, you got a touchdown or whatever. And again, it's how do we build connections and time within our communities where it matters less and less.
Yeah. That's amazing. I didn't know about your exhibit this summer here. One of our Better Conversation topics was about specifically how the civic role of sports, right? How sports can be a unifier and play, a role in civic pride. And so I need to travel down there and look at the exhibit. How long is it?
It just opened in first week of September, so it's here through, I believe, next year, or at least next summer. So.
Yeah. I think it's very similar in the way you come together for sports, and the way that you can, and we've proven it here, can come together in response to a tragedy, right? Like, when you're helping somebody in need, you're not asking the same way. You're not asking how they voted. How do we figure that out when we're not, at a stadium or right, picking up the pieces after a tragedy. That's the question.
And we, of course, our museum opens very similar to the way yours does, which is we start out, early, about President Bush's early life, and then his early presidency, and then it's just you have that moment where 9/11 happened, and you've got the beams from the Trade Center, and you've got the video of the moment-by-moment discussion of, or the clips from the news on what happened that day. I mean, there's a lot of parallel because, of course, he was dealing with that crisis just a few years after this tragedy.
Yeah,
so.
6 years later, which is a blink of an eye.
Yeah.
How optimistic are you? Like, can we get back to a time in which you have Republican governors and Democratic presidents and Republican mayors, working together like we saw here in '95, and honestly, like we saw in solving some of the problems that you mentioned earlier. Maybe they disagree on the solution, but they are working to solve the same problem. How optimistic are you?
I mean, we're starting to see some of it. There's an initiative from the National Governors Conference called Disagreeing Better. I believe the governor of Utah and of, I think, Kansas were really pushing that and how to have these conversations where we can disagree better. We're working on, we have a leadership program with the presidential centers of President George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton and LBJ, where we bring rising leaders from across the political spectrum and across the country to talk about how to come together to address challenges. But in short, I think it's a choice. I think it's a choice each and every one of us has to make is, do we want to personally be divisive, or do we want to try to work towards unity? And maybe stop and think before you put that post up on social media, or before you snap at someone, or look for areas where you can agree and come up with a starting point, and then figure out how you can civilly disagree and listen to what the other person says. But you can't do that if you're shouting, or if you're name calling, or if you're doing all these things that turn off the person you disagree with. But I think we can all build that community better and back if we make that personal choice, and we encourage others to as well.
So is that patriotic?
I think it is.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll get into the patriotism, nationalism distinction a little bit more with some questions. And so I'm hoping that there are some questions out there. So I see cards are up, and we'll start diving into some of your thoughts out there. And I will, while we wait, I think it's, you were mentioning civic groups and coming together. Better conversations like this, if this is the only iteration of this program, then it's really, I'm not sure how much it moves the needle. You need to go out and bring better conversations to your spaces. I hope that you continue to have these conversations in the places you gather, whether it be your kitchen table or after work with colleagues, maybe building up the courage to invite somebody who might think differently than you to engage with, maybe don't start with a debate, maybe start with a drink, but let's find a way to have these conversations outside of these walls. Okay, do we have a question?
So actually, the very top 3 cards in my stack have questions that are very similar. So I'm going to read all 3 questions and then let you respond. So the first one is, how does adding Christian to nationalism complicate things? The second one, you mentioned the church and of course the topic of nationalism. I keep hearing the term Christian nationalism. Can you talk about what that is and what it means? And the next one, what role does religion play in nationalism? What role should it play in our community building and political conversations? So very similar topics will combine into one.
All right. Do you want to?
No softballs here. I actually have a very good friend who teaches about Christian nationalism, so I'm trying to milk all these conversations we've had. Let's start with the First Amendment and separation of church and state. I think most of us would say that our faith and our morals and what we believe, along with our experience, colors our politics, colors our philosophy. A lot of us gain our moral traction from our faith. And I think that is wonderful, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. Now, does it belong in the public sphere? That is a tougher question, and I don't have a good solution to that. And was one of the questions, what is Christian nationalism, or was that, okay. What it means. I think what it means, and I am totally going off outside my expertise here, but so please bear with me. But I think it means that it's a conflation of pride in country with assumption that God is on our side, and I don't think it's limited. Although in the United States, I think that's a little bit more dominant right now, but you see religious nationalism in other countries and in other faith communities. And I just think we all have to tread very carefully, and that's really all I'm going to say on that topic. So.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting you define nationalism as an identity in which you are placing your group above everything else, right? And then you add whatever in front of it, and it becomes not just about the identity, but the supremacy, right? Like, we as a group are better than your group. We should therefore dominate, or whatever, right? Whatever, wherever you take that. And I think that it's, was brilliant in the way that early on our founders realized if they did not create a wall of separation, they were afraid that the Lutherans would dominate the Presbyterians, or what, they wanted to protect their own denomination, their own faith, and so they created that separation.
Well, and they were fleeing state-established religion in Europe. Which a lot of communities around the world still have, and not necessarily Christian communities. The other thing I will say on this, sorry, is that I read J.D. Vance's book a long time ago, and one of the things that he spoke about was about the use of the term Christian to other people by perhaps people who never darkened the door of the church or had read the Bible, but used Christian as a shorthand to differentiate themselves from other people or other groups. So I think that's another area where we all need to be really careful, is what do we mean by this terminology, and again, back to my definition of nationalism, are we using it as a way to elevate or to denigrate?
Yeah, or otherize, which is the first step in that.
Right.
I'm just real quick, do you think in the same way you see some use of the American and un-American terminology in the same way that you could use a religious terminology?
I think we can use all kinds of terminology to otherize people, and I think we do. And there's certain terms that are loaded for certain ideologies that are, mean absolutely nothing to others. I think for example, I think I'm looking around, we're mostly a little bit older audience. So I found out that the thumbs up emoji is considered passive aggressive by younger generations. You know, there are all these symbols, and you use it perfectly innocently, thinking it's fine, and then, oh, why are you being so passive aggressive? I'm like, I didn't mean to be. So, I mean, as a communications professional also, you have to think not just of what you're trying to communicate, but how the person is receiving it. And sometimes that means I stopped using that when I still use it among my own generation and older, but not for...
And symbols can be co-opted,
yes,
too, right, which we see happen all the time.
I think I read somewhere that the OK symbol is now a symbol for white supremacy. I'm like, okay, guess I won't use that anymore. You know, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah. Tina, do we have another question?
A lot of questions. So this next one. You and I studied journalism together at OU, learning to report both sides of the story. The extreme of that has resulted in false equivalencies and a damaging social media mode. So how do journalists work to create and facilitate these better conversations?
To quote somebody, I think I can guess who wrote this question, but to quote someone else we went to OU journalism with who's very busily on audience engagement, I think we have to explain how the sausage is made and how journalists are reporting and what they do, and you know, how do you find the sources that you talk to? And you know, the New York Times recently redid their bios section for their reporters and editors, and will list qualifications and any ethical considerations or conflicts. And, you know, if they're writing about the legal system, it might say, oh, well, they went to law school, or they've been covering this topic for 20 years, or whatever makes them qualified to be tackling the beat that they're on, the particular topic that they're focusing on. Mm-hmm. I think the media needs to be a little bit more transparent about what we do and how we do it. I don't think the general public really understands the difference between the news pages and the opinion section. And I think labeling what we're trying to do a little bit more clearly could also help. Hope that answers it.
So how do journalists do that if all you read are the headlines?
Which, you know, is the other thing, because generally your reporter or producer or whoever isn't the one writing that headline. Mm-hmm. So I would say, and we've actually done quite a bit of work on this at the Bush Center, that there is more of a responsibility for the audience than that there ever before has been. I think we trained the public as journalists over many generations that reading or watching the news was a passive activity. You pick up the newspaper, you turn on the TV, you absorb. Whereas I think now the audience has some responsibility to question and to find out, is the source that they're consuming, or the content creator, are they legitimate? Are they not? Or what's their background? I mean, are they speaking, are they telling you what you want to hear because they're on your side of a debate? Or where are they coming from? And I think that is a new challenge that audiences face. And I think that the younger generations are better about it. Those of us of a certain age are just used to receiving, and we need to be more critical.
Which is particularly dangerous when considering the algorithms you talked about. If we're being pushed in a certain direction and being only shown certain things, it becomes even more important.
I think this next question you may have just answered with that, but I do want to propose it in case there's additional content you want to add. But when presented with facts and alternative facts on the same topic, how do you determine truth?
Do a deep dive, do some research. It stinks, but, you know, and it's a lot of work. I constantly see things posted on social media that I think, oh, wow, really? And I start looking to find out if it's true. If one source is posting something, it's probably not true. I mean, if it's something big enough to be in the mainstream and one news outlet and the others don't catch up, then and somebody's out on a limb, then that might indicate that it wasn't, others weren't able to confirm it. So having somebody else confirm the information is a good starting point. It also matters who's doing the confirmation. I mean, you could spend all day on this, but you know, find the top issues, and you know, think about who your trustworthy sources are, whether it's mainstream media, whether it's you know, somebody ideological that you agree with, but you know, figure out who you trust and who you can turn to in times when you question.
This next question actually has two parts, so I will read the whole. You said one of the dividers today is that there isn't agreement on what the problem is or the problems are. One, can you name some of those key differences in perspective that keep people divided? And two, what are some practical ways to restore common ground about what the problems are?
So here's a big problem, and one we work on at the Bush Center, which is immigration. You got to break that down because it's too big. You will hear people talking about illegal immigrants are the biggest problem. You will hear others talking about how dreamers and a pathway to legal status is the bigger problem. You know, you gotta, in order to address, and look, at the Bush Center, we advocate for comprehensive immigration reform and not doing it piecemeal, but I think that's one example of trying to figure out the approaches to the problem differ because the understanding of the problem differs. Does that answer the question? Yes, no, maybe?
Next. The label patriot seems to have been co-opted by the political right. Is there a difference between being patriotic and supporting patriotism and the term patriot?
I mean, language changes, always has, always will. I think it, again, is a choice. If you feel that the terminology has been corrupted, and I'm not saying it has, then what do you want to use in its place? Or do you want to continue to use the term the way it was originally intended and try to regain the middle ground there? I don't think there's an easy answer.
No, I mean, I really don't think there's an easy answer. And you're right, it's something that's happened over and over and over again. But that's, you know, the key reason why, you know, the younger generation doesn't identify as being patriotic is because it means something different to them than it did to us when we were growing up. You know, what do you do with that? I think, you know, you can look at, I can't open up a newspaper today without seeing like woke and wokeism and this as like an attack, you know, and that was a word that was originally created to, you know, to mean something completely different, right? And so, or even like American, like using that as like like, are you American or un-American or that sort of thing. It's like, it's real difficult to find a place to come together with a common identity if all the words we used to use are being used as attacks.
Yeah.
I don't know if there is an easy answer.
I don't think so.
With the stark division in our country, what is the way forward? How do everyday people influence higher level government, especially when our leaders only seem to be perpetuating the divide?
Again, no softballs here.
ready to solve all of it right now.
But I will go back to what I said earlier, that I think we each have individual choices to make, and how are we going to build in the decisions that we make in terms of what we post, what we say, how we interact with others. And I think we should embrace the opportunity to be citizens, not spectators, and build community within our, do it one person at a time, one community at a time. I think that's the only way we can reclaim the common ground.
A lesson when I'm working with like students here at the memorial, I think one of the most powerful lessons is that bad things happen, and we can prevent or mitigate some of them, but like it's just part of life, and you don't always have control over that, but you do have control over how you respond, and I think you can very easily see that's one of the inspirational and hopeful parts of the story of what happened 30 years ago. And it's very easy to use that as a lesson in your own life, right? And even when problems seem so big, and again, I'm talking to like middle school age students. What is a middle schooler going to do, right, in response to a national tragedy that killed 168 people and ripped apart communities? I mean, that's just it's way too big for a middle schooler. But what middle schoolers did do, and elementary school students and high school students, is they wrote letters and cards and sent them to people in Oklahoma City. And 30 years later, I still hear family members who lost a loved one talking about those cards. There's not a first responder who comes and speaks here who doesn't mention reading the cards at the end of a hard day and it lifting their spirits. It meant everything to them. And so that small act of kindness, that was a choice. That was a choice in how they responded. And it's a choice that we can make. And I think that sometimes we forget that. But it doesn't have to. We don't have to try and solve the problem all at once. All right? We can start with ourselves and our own communities, with the people around us.
I love it. Well, and as this community showed after the bombing, when everybody came together, people didn't say, oh my gosh, there's an act of terrorism in my community, I'm going to go hide in my house, and we didn't really have phones then, but stare at my phone. But it was, how can I get out in my community and make a difference? And I think that's a really great lesson to take away from a tragedy. So.
What happens when leaders are not modeling what the majority would say is civil, democratic behavior? How do we hold our leaders truly accountable?
I mean, we the people, it starts with us. We hold those leaders accountable at the ballot box, in their forums, write letters, make clear that they work for us, and if you're not happy, tell them so.
Yeah, and maybe even starts before then in how we treat each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a simple answer to a very difficult and loaded question.
It is. I mean, look, if it were easy, if there was an overnight fix, I think we would have done it already. I think the solution of working on an individual and a community level is going to be a lot harder. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort, and it's not going to fix the divide in this country overnight. But hopefully together we can get there.
Well, and I think as you said too in your piece, maybe the answer is patriotism, right? We just have to figure out how to get back there, right? And also, let's take, maybe it's been co-opted by groups, but they don't own it. We can take it back, right? And so, I think it's a beautiful sentiment, and I think it's a real, I'm optimistic about it as well. I do think that, as humans, right, we're not so very different than we were 30 years ago, and certainly we can repeat, the successes that we've seen in the past. Well, you want to sneak in one more?
I want to sneak in one more because
Okay.
this might be the really hard ball.
All right.
So we can end on this one. You just knock it out of the park.
I was trying to end on a positive, like, let's.
Well, I think this would be positive too. How can we show love for our country without becoming blind to its mistakes?
You want to go first?
Well, I think I had a really good history teacher, several growing up. I've heard others, my friends, who did not, right? But I think I did, and like I came out of my education understanding our country as a project, right? As like this a nation built on ideals that from the very beginning wasn't perfect, far from it. And those who wrote it knew that. And so there is a process at play, and we're part of that process. And so if you can't be, reflective, then that process doesn't work anymore. And so if you can't love your country and still recognize that we're still working on it, then then we lost, right? And so I think that's, I don't know. And again, maybe it starts with education. Maybe we're not doing a good enough job of teaching that version. Because if you teach a different version and there's no room for self-criticism and no room for improvement, what are we even doing?
Yeah, I would agree with everything you just said, and also add that I think we have to talk about it, and there's a push in this country right now to not talk about bad things, and what is that very trite saying that everyone repeats, that those who don't learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. I think that pretending it didn't exist is not going to make it go away, and might actually end up harming future generations who are, because talking about, gosh, we enslaved people for hundreds of years in this country, and then we realized what a horrible thing it was, but pretending we didn't. How do we do that? We can't teach the lessons unless we talk about
hard history. Yeah. Well, and in fact, I would argue. In fact, in your piece, you one of the words you used to describe patriotism was self-reflective. Mm-hmm. Like, we have to be able to look at that hard history and have conversations about it. And also, thanks for plugging Better Conversations, because that's what we're trying to do here, right?
Which I think is great, and I know a lot of you were first-timers, but this has been wonderful, and I hope people come back. So.
Yeah. Real quick, today is the very last day to purchase tickets for Day 1, which is our annual luncheon that begins 168 Days of Remembrance leading to April 19th. And so if that sounds like something you're interested in, this year is going to be just really, really powerful, talking about forgiveness. And, we're going to hear from people that have forgiven what I think a lot of us would consider to be unforgivable. So it's going to be very, very powerful. And then our next Better Conversations coming up, we have two great topics heading into the holidays: exploring grief, which I think that is something that we don't really talk about, but we all will experience if we have not yet. And the holidays is a time where we feel it acutely. So we're going to, joining me on stage for the Better Conversation program are going to be experts that are able to talk about their own grief, but also what is it, right? Like, and what are some strategies? And then we're going to end the year, this 30th anniversary year, and Carrie mentioned this will be the 12th Better Conversation that we've done. The Bill Clinton Presidential Library will be here to talk about the health of civic life. And I think that's something, they did a really comprehensive study in Arkansas, and we're excited to do a similar thing here in Oklahoma, and they're going to talk about what that means. And I think it's going to be a great way to end the year, and how very cool to be sitting on stage one day with the George W. Bush Presidential Center, and then a different day with the Bill Clinton or William J. Clinton Presidential Center. And it speaks to, I think, what we're all trying to accomplish here, and that is let's all get together instead of being partisan, dividing, and let's work on solving the problems.
And I would like to say that President Bush and President Clinton work very closely together these days on. We have our Presidential Leadership Scholars Program. I believe they were both just together in D.C. for that. And when the Ukraine war started, and they laid flowers together at the Ukrainian church in Chicago. And it's they're in the post-presidency. They've they do a lot together. So,
Margot, this was fantastic. Thank you
Me too.
so much. Can we get a round of applause?
Thank you.
And just as loud, can I hear a round of applause for you for being here today?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure that was as loud. And thank you for everyone who tuned in, in the streaming service. I hope that a lot of people who aren't able to take a lunch and come see a program like that were able to experience that. And so with that, we adjourn.
Thank you so much.
Yes, this
How do you
was
think it
lovely.
went?
Well, I mean, I never know. I watch